Hey everybody, thanks for joining me today. I do appreciate it. I will try and make my way as best as I can without Boo helping me. So what I've basically done here is I've wet my paper and I started laying in a little bit of this quinacridone magenta, a little bit of yellow around the moon, and a lot of ultramarine blue to help to get that nice cool atmosphere going. And as I said, a little bit of pink in there, which would have been Daniel Smith quinacridone magenta, and then rim that moon with a little bit of yellow. And I'm going in, you'll see me doing this quite a bit on this one. I'm going in with a tissue, or a paper towel I should say, and I'm blotting it out on areas that I don't want that blue to be on so much of the branches. And so I'm just working it. I know that once this dries, it's not going to be nearly dark enough, but when you're working kind of with a dark watercolor like this, you'll understand that you just need to do it in stages, in layers. So I'm putting just my initial layer down here, making sure that everything is cool, and I'll be able to go in over the top of it as we work. You can't see it, but off to the side I've gathered some reference for how I want my nocturne to look. I've looked up on the internet scary trees, and I've looked up Halloween type images, and so I have an idea as to where I want to go to, but it's going to take a little bit of building up. So the best way for me to make sure that I'm doing what I need to do is to start with this very cool blue color and know that I'm going to warm it up as I go along. But it's important that I get this initial color lay in. So I've got that blue in there. I'm charging a little bit of this green, which is a jadeite green, a little bit of phthalo green. It's actually phthalo green first, and then I went in with a little bit of jadeite up towards that upper part of the bush that's going to be receiving more light. Eventually that will have more oranges in it, but just for right now I'm trying to lay in the values of what I'm doing, not being too terribly careful about it, but knowing that as I go along everything is going to kind of blend together, and especially when you're working darks like this. I could actually make this scene a lot less colorful than I do, but I'm looking at it more as kind of a book illustration than a realistic depiction of what this would look like. So now I'm charging a little bit of that warmer green in there, along with some burnt siennas, because it's being caught by the moonlight on the top part of those branches. And that is probably a little bit of sap green or green apatite genuine, which is these are all Daniel Smith colors, and I love this green apatite genuine. They make it with apatite, the mineral. They grind it up, and it has a wonderful way of giving you that gorgeous granulation to it. And so I use that whenever I can in my greens, because it makes things look so gorgeous. It's just one of the reasons why I love Daniel Smith watercolors so much. They have great granulation colors. So the next step here is to start adding in some of the warmth that of these leaves and bushes that are being lit up by the moon back there, and to make that transition back over into the cool of the greens, the dark areas that aren't catching nearly the amount of light as those leaves are up by the crow. Up by the raven there. So just kind of working it back and forth. I'm going to have to continue to darken things up as I go. And it looks a little bit darker here on screen than it actually is. It looks like a lot of that detail that I put in on that tree trunk with the ink has been obliterated, but actually it shows through rather nicely. You can see it without too much problem when you see the original. And so there I am working in the warms and cools of those leaves. I've decided now it's time to go in and darken up that sky a little bit. Now this sky, even though it's a full moon sky, normally the sky is darker than this. It's usually pretty black. But since I'm treating this kind of as an illustration, a book illustration, I'm just going to make it more vibrant than it would be. And then once you put the stars in there, you can definitely tell that it's a night sky. But until those go in, it reads more just like I'm painting everything too dark. Continue to put in those wonderful leaves. Don't put it all in one fell swoop. Just kind of dot them in so that it looks like there's more detail there than there actually is. If you kind of dot them in, it gives you a real nice feeling of depth. You see here that I've taken to putting in this red glow where the moon is behind the leaves there. And then I'm taking one of my Jelly Roll pens, the white pens, which are water soluble, so I can always knock them back. But I'm putting that highlight on the top part of these branches. And then I'm going in and dotting in some holes in between where the moon's coming through those leaves. Now, this is an important part over here. This is the reflected light. And I just got a little bit of ultramarine blue, or maybe even a little bit of cobalt blue gouache. And I'm getting that reflected light in there. I'm doing it as though it's a very craggy type tree, which it is. And I'm brushing in a lot of the highlights, a lot of the details, which is a really fun part because it actually starts coming to life whenever you do that. You can just see that there's a lot of atmosphere and reflected light going on there. Pretty cool. This is normal speed. You can kind of see how fast I'm working. So I'm moving along. I'm not going super fast on it, but it really did not take all that long to do the watercolor on this. And there it is. That's what it looked like once it was all done and scanned in. I realize as I'm looking at this that I did not remember to video the skull, but it was just simply going in there, drawing over the top. It was not something that I had planned to do, just decided as I was looking at it that it needed that skull. Well, congratulations everybody. You made it at least halfway through. And I'm going to do this Photoshop portion as quickly and as easily as I can show you. So let's just go ahead and hop right into this. What we've got here is the watercolor scan that you just saw me complete. I have it so that it's above the background layer. And here's a group that's going to show you this is what we're going to have it look like when we get finished. So let's just go ahead and hop right into it. The very first thing I want to do is go down here. This is my layers palette. Go down and start a new layer, add a new layer. I'm going to go ahead and clip this by hitting the Option or Alt key in between the two layers. That means that anything that I do on this upper layer is only going to show if there's opaqueness on the bottom layer. So pretty self-evident once I get started on this, but that just means that this white area out here is going to remain white. It's not going to look funky. So we're going to darken this up to begin with. We're going to set the layer mode to multiply. Now let's just talk about layer modes here real quick. Layer modes tell Photoshop how you want the top layer to interact with the layers below it. Some of them darken your layer, some of them lighten your layer, some of them use mathematical equations, and then there's all these down here. We don't need to concern ourselves with that. We're going to be using multiply on this one. And so I've got my brush tool selected here, and in order to select a color that I want to use, I hit my Option or Alt key. I select one of the blue colors, say up in here somewhere, something that's relatively dark, and I'm going to go ahead and fill it by going to Edit, Fill it with the foreground color which we just selected, and as you can tell that's way too dark, but we're going to go over to Opacity and we're going to lighten it up to about 10% or so, something like that. So we're just going to darken it up a little bit, but we don't want this moon area to be darker and we don't want the skull area. So let's grab our eraser tool over here. Let's get ourselves a nice soft brush. Increase the size by using the right and left brackets. Increasing your brush size, you use the right bracket key. Decreasing it, you use the left. So this is about the size we want here, I think. And so let's go ahead and erase this. All right. And so you can see down here in the layer, it's no longer a flat blue. You've got an area that's white because we've erased that out. Let's reduce the size of the brush. Do the same thing on the skull. And okay. Now the next thing we're going to do, add a new layer. Clip it to the layer below, change this layer mode over to soft light. And right now what we're doing is we're working on this glow effect. We're going to use eventually two different modes, but for this one, select your brush again, bring it up in size, make sure that it's a soft brush. You can find your brushes up here and choose one of your general brushes. So I'm going to go ahead and increase the size of this. Let me sample all this nice little orange here.
You've got frickin' mail.
Oh, I got email. Anyways, okay, so let's go ahead and we're going to go ahead and click on that. And you can see how this has increased the saturation and the brightness. What this soft light layer does is it interacts with the layer below it, and anything that's lighter than 50% it brightens, anything that's lower than 50% it darkens. But it's doing exactly what we want it to do here. Let's go ahead and click another layer, clip it, make sure that it's active, set this mode layer to screen. This screen mode essentially does the same thing, only it works a little bit better for what we're trying to do. And what this screen mode does is it takes whatever color you have and it lightens up your dark lines to make them whatever color you have selected. So let's say we select, I don't know, how about more of a bright red. This isn't going to work with what we want, but I just want to show you. Increase the size of the brush, click on it, and there you go. You see the light areas in the background are not affected, only the dark lines are affected. And so we can just knock that back, the opacity back to where we want it to be. I happen to think that that's maybe a little too red, so let's go ahead and knock it back to there. And then one of the other things I would like to do is select a little bit of a pink color. You can see it back here. Let's do a pink color around the outside here and see how that looks. I'm going to drop down the opacity of my brush. Let's drop it down to somewhere in the 30s and go ahead and brush around the outside of that. Maybe you want that just a little bit more intense. Maybe somewhere around there. Let's try that. Okay. And so that gives you a little bit of a better feel. And Let's just come in here and let's see if we brighten this up a little bit, how that's going to look. Let's try that. I don't want it to be fire engine red because, you know, moonlight is a pretty weak light. And I think that's probably about where we want it. What do you think? It looks a bit like a glow. And so now I want to go down into the area where the mist is and the skull. Let's go ahead and add some mist down there. I'm going to sample this color by holding my Option key down while I've got my brush tool selected. Hold down my Option key. Increase the size of the brush. And let's bring the opacity of that brush up to about 60%. See how that works. I don't want it to be full blown, but I do want it to be visible and try and do it in as few strokes as possible. Okay, so getting a little more of that mist down there. I'm going to brighten that up just a little bit, make that mist a little more prominent. There we go. Oh, that screen layer is awfully transparent. So we'll put another one in here. Do this for screen. Drop the opacity. Let's drop it down to about 50% and try and brush on there. See how that looks. Oh, there we go. That's more like what I'm looking for, right? Drop that opacity down a little bit. So really you're playing with this until you get the effect you're looking for. And if it doesn't work, you just keep playing with it until it does. All right, so there's our first mist layer. Let's go in and we're going to put a second mist layer in, and I'll show you why we're going to do this differently. Do another screen. Now I could go in here and I can try and brush this in and make it look like, okay, this is your smoke, your mist, you know, be all fancy. There's easier ways. Just go into the internet, do a search for smoke brushes. Free smoke brushes are usually the best, and these are some that I've downloaded off of the internet. And let's see, let's use this one here. I think we'll give that one a try. Now this is a big brush. You can see the outline of it there. And so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click this once. And that should probably be enough. Let me get rid of that brush outline. Now that looks great, doesn't it? Well, maybe not so much. Now what we're going to do is we're going to transform this in order for it to work as we want it to work. So in order to do that, edit, free transform. When you do that, everything that's on this layer is going to get a bounding box around it. And so you can reduce the size, whatever you want to do with it, by just stretching these. If you find that, well, that's almost what I'm looking for, but you know, maybe I need to skew it a little bit, you can skew this by holding down the command or your command key on a Mac, control key on a PC, and you see that over the handles it changes to a little arrow, and that means that you can move this to whatever direction you want it to be. And we'll bring this down just a little bit. I think that's looking pretty decent. It's kind of what I'm looking for. All right, let's go ahead and hit the return key, and that's going to be just fine for what we're doing. I'm going to close that. All right, and then let's pick another brush, because as you can see, this brush here ended right here, so we don't want to see the edge of that. So let's go up, pick another smoke brush. Oh, let's see, what have we got here? How about this one? Oh, okay, let's try that one. All right, that's kind of creepy. And so obviously this one is just it's too intense, so we're going to drop the opacity down on this layer so that it looks more wispy. And I'm going to change my brush up here over to a nice general round soft brush and reduce the size of it. I'm going to get rid of this hard edge down here. Come on. Okay, there we go. All right. And then I'm going to take an eraser, my eraser here, and I'm going to erase some of this out so I can see this skull a little bit more. All right. That's better. Use that down. Go back over here and brush a little bit in here. Whoops. All right. So I think that's about what we're looking for down on the bottom. There's a couple more things that I want to do here before we say we're done. First of all, we'll start a new layer. Go ahead and clip it like we did before. Make sure your brush is selected. We're going to go and select a hard round brush. It's way too big, so use your bracket key to bring it down. And we're going to put in some stars here. Make sure your opacity is up to 100%. You don't need that many stars, but the stars that you have in should be kind of hard-edged, because stars, they look very sharp when you look up at them at the night sky. Don't put in too many. Let's click on this one. Now we'll bring up the white stars. And generally I like my white stars to be smaller. Yeah. Be careful about putting stars around your glow. They tend to fade out when they get towards the light. So if you put them too close, it'll look incorrect. All right, so we've got the stars in. We can name that, I suppose. And then the very last thing we're going to do is we've got this signature down here. And you can see the signature. The way I had it on the original Photoshop version, it was reversed, so it was in white. So what I've done is I've taken and I've just made a selection of that signature and I floated it on its own layer. So to do that, you would just come up here to your polygonal lasso tool and you click and you make a selection around only the parts that you want to show up as white. All right, so let's pretend that I've done that all the way around. Once you get your selection, you go on to your watercolor scan. Command J will float it onto its own layer. And that's what I have right here. And now what we have to do is we have to make what's black white and what's white black and only have the white show through. So right now we're going to go up to Image, Adjustment, Invert. And that changes, it inverts everything. So what was white was black and what was black is white. And that's what we've got here. And then our wonderful blending mode for the layers. You go down to Screen and there you go. All the black disappears. That's what Screen does. It only shows the things that are lighter than what's underneath it. And since it's a little bit too bright, go ahead and knock it back a little bit. I almost forgot to show you one. Well, I did forget to show you one thing. I want to go ahead and do this because it will help to sell this effect. So we start a new layer, clip it to the ones below it, set the mode to normal, which is what it comes up to by default. Get your brush, come over here using your Option key, sample the bright light of the moon here, and select your brush. I hold down the Control key and that will bring up my brush palette. I want a soft round brush. I'm going to bring it up in size, and I'm going to reduce the opacity on this down to about, let's say, 20%. So that's where you do that. And so let's go ahead and start knocking back some of these leaves that are behind this raven. Do the same thing here. All right, that's kind of what we want here. I'm going to get rid of those little goobers there. Just a habit of mine, putting those little atmosphere dots in. So now what we're going to do is we're going to get rid of the glow that's in front of the raven here. Let me go ahead and get my eraser tool, reduce the size of the brush, make sure that the opacity is set to 100%. I'm going to go ahead and start erasing out any of this glow that I don't want on this branch and on the raven itself. Go ahead and get that off of there, and here as well. And that way he'll look like he's sitting closer to us than these leaves are. So let me turn it on and off. So they're competing with each other here. You put that little bit of glow in, and he stands out much better. Here we go. And that is the whole Photoshop process. It's not difficult. If you're not familiar with screen modes, you can go on to YouTube. Hey, have you heard of YouTube? You can go on to YouTube and look them up, and they can explain them much better than I can. There are a few that I use all the time: multiply, screen, lighten, soft light, overlay. And you know, you get those under your belt and you can do an awful lot in Photoshop. So anyways, thank you all for checking in. I sure do appreciate it. Thanks to all my subscribers. Thanks to the new subscribers. Thanks to those of you who are thinking about subscribing. If this is something you like, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. Otherwise, as always, we'll see you down the road.